Thanks. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Artist Studio. This is my fourth time doing this, and I really enjoy it because you get to meet people who are artistic, intelligent, unique, and we have all that tonight. The person that you're here to see, saying he's an artist, I said this to him, is like saying a world-renowned chef is a good cook. Okay, but there's more to the whole thing. And he does all kinds of things. I'll let him tell you what he considers himself to be. He is unique. He is greatly intelligent. He is very, very talented. He's just a great guy. Will you please welcome Derrick Adams. Thank you and good night. Hey, Derrick.
Hey.
What's up?
How's it going?
Okay, Derrick, tell them what you consider yourself to be.
In one word, I would probably say I'm a facilitator. I help people, connect people. I would hope so. I would hope I am.
Well, as the song goes, let's start at the beginning, a very good place to start. You're from Baltimore.
Yep.
We're both from Maryland.
Yep.
Tell me about the early years growing up there.
Well, before I officially moved to New York in '93, I grew up in Baltimore. And, you know, Baltimore, for people who've been to Baltimore, it's a pretty, blue-collar town, but creative in some areas. But it was a really interesting place for the starting point. Being from the city really exposed me to a lot of just day-to-day experiences. And I think even when I was younger, I always considered myself an artist and knew that I was going to be an artist.
Before you go on,
Yeah.
I never knew what I wanted to do. How did you know you wanted to be an artist?
Well, when I was in elementary school, I had the privilege of having this elementary school teacher that I really loved, a younger black woman, which was one thing I remember a lot because most of my teachers were older. And she noticed that I was talented, or she thought I was talented, and she started to give me like assignments outside of the class. And so she would give me assignments that were contest assignments, like more like city competitions. And so she would give me like assignments that were open for school students, like energy conservation or heritage myself. And she would read the instructions to me, and she would tell me to make a work. And then she would just, without me knowing, she would enter it into contests.
Now, what did you do? Did you paint? Did you do a collage, a poster?
Well, they were mostly drawings and stuff with crayon and whatever.
How old were you?
Probably about 7 or 8. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And then I won a contest one time, and I got to meet the mayor.
You got to meet the mayor.
Yeah, so it was cool. And he had my work in his office.
He had your work in his office.
Yeah.
That's cool too.
So that was like the first intro for like what could happen in art. And so this teacher I had, Miss Wilson, she was just a facilitator at the time. And so she kind of let me understand like what could happen being an artist. And so I did that, and then when I really realized that I was an artist, or the benefits of being an artist, is when, from that time, the school started to look at art different from me winning this contest in this city school. And so my role in elementary school changed to like be like the head of like all the banners that were being made for the holiday stuff. But that didn't even make me feel like as an artist until my friends who wanted to get out of their classes started to like, come on, man, let me paint these banners with you, man. Come on, like I want to get out of. And I realized like, oh, this is power.
Yeah.
As an artist, you can like get other people out of class and like you can kind of be in an auditorium all day. But that was kind of like the beginning of that part of just realizing what art could be. That was like the beginning of it.
When you were 7 or 8,
Yeah.
and you had your stuff hung on the walls of the mayor's office, that's heavy stuff for
Yeah.
a young kid. What'd you think?
I mean, I didn't really process it as much. I even remember my mom, who worked a lot. She couldn't even do it. She couldn't even come to the ceremony. Not that she couldn't take off what she could, but it wasn't. She didn't understand the prestige of it all, and so she sent her brother, who was my uncle, who I loved at the time, a younger uncle, who took me, and we probably had a much better time hanging out. But he, just it was a constant. I guess it began to grow with accomplishments, with things like like I got an award for it, but my mom, she'll call me like maybe a few years ago, and she was like, you were, I was so young then, I didn't have any idea. She was just like, I don't even know where your award is. I don't even know where your trophy is. I don't even know where stuff, because it wasn't as pressing at the time with because I was so prolific as a younger person. It wasn't like it was one big moment. It was just, I was just making stuff, just constantly making stuff. And because of my teacher, things ended up being stuff. Not because of other stuff. My teacher who just understood the value of it.
Now, and I know, kids can be kind of rough, kind of mean.
Yeah.
In junior high, did they give you a hard way to go because you weren't playing sports? More than that.
How do you know that? No.
Did you play sports? Were you into rap music or music itself? And did they kind of resent all that attention you were getting for something that wasn't in their mainstream?
When I was younger, I played football in the earlier part, but it was more of like a community thing more than my personal interests. It was like everyone was doing it, so I was doing it. And I enjoyed it as a collective thing. But my brother, who passed, he was more of a person who was like a sports guy. And it was like times in my life where as I was growing where other people kind of brought to attention my value as a creative person. My brother, who was not an artist at all, who when he was a teenager and I was younger, I would come home and see him showing people my stuff, like his friends.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's
He was like, he's different than us. He's better than us. He's gonna be something. He would say stuff like that. So he would just show my work, my drawings. And I also had an uncle who was in the military, but he was also a commercial artist in Baltimore. So he went to commercial art school, and so he gave me a lot of like as I gotten older, when he came home from the military, he would show me like certain techniques in drawing and stuff like that. And he would give me pointers on like how to draw like the eyes and things like that you can't really get without having some type of reference to. So he gave me that.
When did you first realize there was an art community, that they were out there, that you could kind of dive in to that group and be part of it?
I think right before I moved from Baltimore to New York, I had family members who were artists, but I wasn't always around them. But I knew that I had some family in New York who were in the arts. But in Baltimore, my stepdad's a musician, but the first time I really got into art was really interesting because it was through like a non-art group of people. I had some friends who went to like Morgan State College and Howard University, and they lived in Baltimore, and they were renting this big brownstone, and they basically wanted to have like stuff happening to make people come there and hang out. And so it happened that a couple of their friends were artists. And so they said, why don't you like start having shows here, and we can have a party and invite people to come. And so we put art throughout the whole 3 floors of the house. And so it ended up being like that type of starting out point where people just coming. The art was part of it, but it was really more about the community of it and just exposing people to creativity. And so I ended up gaining a network, a small network in Baltimore of just artists who were kind of looking towards like older, modern artists from the historical Black college era, like Elizabeth Catlett and Romeo Beard and all those guys. So a lot of the artists that I started out with were kind of mimicking that genre of artists, but it was fresh for us at the time. And so that was the beginning of it before I decided to like move to New York.
Okay, let's talk about New York, New York.
Yeah.
How'd you get there from Baltimore?
Well, first with my family, who I was saying before, who were already in New York, I had relatives who were in the arts, and I had a cousin who was an artist, a self-taught artist, and he had a studio in Brooklyn, and he was older, and his son was around my age. So I started, even still then, I still didn't think of myself as like an art, as a career, but I knew he was an artist, and so I would go stay with him and his son, and basically I would just be the person running errands for him most of the day, whatever, what he's doing. And I never really thought about the trajectory of being an artist. And I was just kind of following his lead and looking at, observing what he was doing. And then then I understood that, the exposure to art was so much more prominent in New York than Baltimore, because my group was so small, we were just at this one place that we would have stuff. And so I decided just to come to New York and go to Pratt for art. And the way I even came to Pratt in New York, before I transferred to Brooklyn to New York, I was going to a community college for a little while.
How old were you then?
Like 20, 21.
Okay.
And I had to do a book report on an artist. And so I went to the public library, and I was looking around for artists to write a book on, and I pulled out this book of this young painter with a pipe. He was like in his 20s, and it was Jacob Lawrence, but I didn't know who Jacob Lawrence was, and I started flipping through the book.
You guys do.
And I was like, oh my God, this guy's like in his 20s, he looks cool, he's making these amazing paintings. And then I wrote this whole, elaborate, like beyond what I was required to do on this thing, on his work. And I went back to class, and I told my instructor, I said, have you ever heard of this this artist, And she was like, yeah, and I was like, he taught at Pratt, because he taught at Pratt at one time. And I said, have you ever heard of Pratt? And she was like, yeah. And I said, I'm going to go there. I'm going to Pratt. And she said, you have to be good to go there. And I was like, I know, Yeah. And so now, so then I just start investigating, about the school, and then I called, and they told me about their open submission time or their open portfolio time, and then I called my relatives who were in New York, who, again, my cousin, who was more of a self-taught artist, wasn't really into like the whole academic world, so I was pretty much on my own finding all that information. And then I finally came to New York and brought my portfolio to Pratt. I actually went to SVA. It was kind of weird, I was kind of scared of being rejected from Pratt, so I went to SVA first, and having the backup. And I got into SVA through the portfolio thing, and so I was going to settle for SVA. I was like, well, I got into one school, maybe I should just go to SVA. And my cousin, who I was staying with, said to me, another one of my cousins from Baltimore who lives in New York, who's not an artist, said to me, you should just go to Pratt anyway, and it's why not? They said, it's why not, just go. He took me there. He was not that much older than me, and I got into Pratt, and I was super excited. And once I got in and I was there for a while, and I would ask all the instructors who were there now, did they know who Jacob Lawrence was, you know? And some of them told me, like, you know, I was on this hunt for Jacob Lawrence, you know? and one instructor who I had in design class said to me, he actually was my instructor when I was a student here. And I was like, wow. And then we started talking and stuff like that. But the highlight of the experience is my senior year, the black alumni of Pratt honored both he and his wife, Gwendolyn. And they came. And they said, we want you to be the host for them and take them around everywhere all day.
See, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus.
Yeah. They say squeaky wheels get the grease. If you go around telling people, then people are going to, you know. So I walked them around all day, and the most fulfilled moment of that experience was, unfortunately at the time, Jacob was really at a particular place where he couldn't get around as much. And so he had like difficulty walking up and down the stairs. So, and both he and his wife were up in age. So I basically, like, they both held onto my arms most of the time. I was walking around all day, like to go down the steps, up the steps, to walk down the hall. So I was just basically like this, like I was at crutches for the whole day, which was great. And but it definitely gave me like this other level of appreciation for the arts once you meet someone that you have been looking at, and you realize it's real, and like you could do it. You could do it too. Like it's not unattainable as you know, as an artist, to see people doing it like that. And from that time, I've learned so much more about him and met other people who've known him really well. But he's definitely like an inspiration to me.
Let's talk about the fact that I'm African American, you're African American. Yeah. Your art, a lot of African American references. Yeah. When you got to New York, you saw outdated images. What does that mean?
That's always a challenge. It reminds me of the Lauryn Hill, Miseducation of Lauryn Hill.
Great album.
I think that, you know, there's things that as creative people you can do. And I remember, because my undergrad degree is in art education instead of fine art, because after being at Pratt and realizing that I'm an artist and I'm going to keep making art, I didn't feel like I needed to major in art. I did feel like if I was able to, I had to work out a little thing though. I had to, most people who major in art education didn't have a studio. So I had to figure out a way to get a studio and to be able to take the same classes as art painting majors and still take my art ed classes, because I felt like I was more interested in art education as a component of art than just making art. And so I wasn't able to have the end of the year show as fine art majors had, but what I did as a substitute, I just did my show in the hallway of the education office. Because I didn't have a gallery, but I had work, and so I was able to do the show there. But just learning about education was really important, and just as an art ed major, you actually had to work in school systems, and my experience was looking through like a lot of visual imagery from the schools, and a lot of stuff was outdated, and you know, but a lot of history. I started to realize in education and visual culture, which is even more dominant than literary culture, that it's very hard to unlearn images that you've seen if you're young, and that's what you see every day. It's hard to like get it out of your head as a kid, as an infant or whatever. If you see things that are considered normal, it's hard to make them, you know, take it back. So so I just thought about that as a role of an artist and as an African American, how to really think about the future in my role as an artist and what to put out in the world as images to look for as a level of empowerment, not just for me or my culture, but for people to see other aspects of my culture that are normal to me, you know, because some people don't understand what is normal to me versus what is normal to them.
Now, we talked about this, the Black Panther, the movie.
Yes.
Have you seen it?
Loved it.
Why?
Because it's a level of fantasy that we're not always allowed to have. and that's a very important part of art to me. Art is a place of fantasy and fantasticalness that is considered a luxury. And it also is a form of intellectualism that certain people are not actually promoted to participate in. It's not always about it being true or false or whatever, but the fact that people are allowed to imagine realities is an empowering thing. And that's the strength of Western culture. When you go to Florence or you go to Rome, the sculptures do not reflect how people really looked. Right. It reflects the way they want you to think they looked in the future. And we never had that luxury. So that's what I think about as the power of cinema and things that you want to reflect the way you want people to look at you. And the strength of Western culture that I learned from being at Pratt is that when you look at the cathedrals and all the imagery in those spaces, was a very calculated idea of people in a certain position of power to capture people who were not in power to be sure that they're looked at a certain way in the future. And it has to do with a level of foresight that everyone has, but other people are not promoted to use as a tool of empowerment. And that's the real level of empowerment, your imagination. And, so that's why I just realized that from a younger age in art school.
Derrick, when I saw the Black Panther, I have kids, twins, they're 14. They think what they see now was always. It wasn't. When I grew up, you wouldn't have had a movie like that. You wouldn't have had black people who were kings and scholars. And I substitute teach. I said to the kids, who saw Black Panther this weekend? Hands went up. I said, I'm going to say a bad word. The women were badass. And all the girls said, they sure were. And but when I was younger, there was maybe one black person in a movie. Yeah. They killed him off quick. Or he was a thug. Or he was just, you didn't have...
Stereotypical.
Right.
Yeah.
You didn't have what you see today.
Yeah.
And where did that come from as far as your perception, what you wanted to show?
Well, I think that for me, it's always fascinating to see things that present certain levels of imagination and cultural perspective in a way that is refreshing and enlightening, but also liberating in a certain way. And watching Black Panther, for me, really evoked like the way I felt or the way I'm thinking from talking to people who lived in New York, the way they felt when The Wiz came out. When you speak to a lot of people about The Wiz, it was if social media was out when The Wiz came out, it would probably be as big as Black Panther, okay. I think. If you think about like Diana Ross, Michael Jackson, Nipsey Russell, Lena Horne, all these people who are like the biggest artists of their time, who were also activists, they were picketing in that Washington Monument, and they had a gigantic movie. So can you imagine if social media existed at the time, how publicized that experience would have been? And not only that, it had such a large cast of people, very similar to the Black Panther, of just people who just came just to do the performances. Every scene had at least hundreds of people in it performing who were all creative people starting off in the industry who participated in the movie. So I think that is probably a version of what we see now within Black Panther that existed on a more, I would say, like analog level at the time.
Back to art. Are you thinking about scenes and collages and videos all day?
Yeah.
Okay, let me ask you another question. when you think of something, do you think that would make a good sculpture? That would make a good video? That would make a great, how does that work?
Usually, most of my inspiration comes from when I'm looking at other artists' works that I respect and admire, and I think about when I'm looking at that work, how does it make me feel? Like when I'm looking at a photo or a painting, I think about the emotional response I get from it, and then I think about not how to mimic that work, but how to capture the feeling I felt through my own work, creating something else. Because what's important a lot of times with visual arts is not the art itself and what you're looking at, it's more about the emotion that it evokes from you looking at it, is what makes the art more present and has the longevity. So if you're able to capture the feeling of what you feel when you're looking at something through your own practice, through looking at the way it's situated in the space, because if it's a sculpture, it's about where it is, how big it is, who it's about, the material, all those things, and that's what people are responding to. That's the visceral part of art that some artists know and some people know, and that's what motivates me to make a collage versus a painting versus a video. And they all have their own function in space, and something that's on the wall cannot give you the same feeling necessarily as something you have to walk around, you know? So those things are important. Or cinema, which is a certain form of expression, has a certain output because it's backlit, and that's going to give you a different sense of response versus something that is not backlit, like a painting on the wall. So all those things are important to think about. That's what I think about. I'm sorry.
As my sister would say, well, check you out.
Yeah.
Very nice. When you were talking about things that move you, I could hear people going, uh-huh. Who moves you? What artists move you?
One of my favorite artists, I mean, I have quite a few, but one artist I really love a lot is Jamel Shabazz, if you guys know who he is.
Why?
Just his work overall, but then his whole life story. I mean, he's been taking photographs since the 70s. He's been in the military. He was a correctional officer. He retired. He's been taking photographs the whole time. His dad was a photographer. He gave him a camera. Like, he's been taking photographs with no intention of being a famous photographer. He was just taking photographs of things that he thought were not being captured in society. And now his work is now, like, I think of him as like Gordon Parks.
Okay.
What's so amazing about him is that he never had the same intention as a Gordon Parks as an artist. Like, Gordon was always thinking about where he was and his position he was in society and dealing with different issues as a black artist at the time and wanting to be a part of something bigger than what was happening within the black community as an artist. So he was more strategic in his idea of what an artist is and what an artist can do. And he brought Shaft and all those different important, another major movie similar to the time, probably predating, The Wiz, and probably got the same type of response. But Jamel Shabazz is, if you meet him and talk to him, he is just an amazing person, and he happened to be a photographer. And I look at a lot of his photography when I'm making my art. Even though I don't make a photograph from his photos, but I look at the way that the figures in his work connect with each other, and I think about that when I'm making certain things and how I want the feeling I feel when I look at his work that can be conveyed through my work.
Derrick, art is a crowded field. It's a hard field. How did you get heard?
A lot of work. Well, I had the privilege of working at a gallery when I was younger. And it was a nonprofit gallery, but I worked with a lot of more established older artists. And the mission of the gallery was to show artists who were at a certain level, mid-career or even later, who did not get the exposure that they should have. And some of these artists were popular within the African American community, and and outside of the African American community were people who were serious collectors and supporters and educated people, but they were not mainstream. But with me, I actually had the privilege of hanging out with some of these artists who were probably, I was in my 20s, they were probably in their 50s, 60s, whatever, like Ed Clark or Frank Bowling or Herb Gentry or Afro Cobra, those guys, James. And so at the
How did you get involved with them?
My job as a gallery manager was to go to their studio. When they had a show at the gallery, we had Howardine and Pindell. I would go with them and kind of hang out with them, with the photographer, and photograph them in their studio for press, and then pick an image from their studio to use for invitation. But what I got was way more, because I got like the real deal experience of talking to an older established artist. But what was really common was how they felt slighted, and how they worked alongside of a lot of well-known artists that we know, like Francis Bacon. Like a lot of artists would say, people would talk about them in that way too. They were best friends with these artists, these other artists who we know, and in modern culture. They also influenced some of their work. You can see something when you start to hear them talk about certain people. You can see certain likenesses of their work in other artists' works, and some of them even had shows at the Whitney. Like Frank Bowling had a show at the Whitney in the 70s. And that work was a total, was not received well. He didn't show it again until 2013. Now he's huge, but he's like 80-something now, And a lot of these artists like Ed Clark, he's almost 90 now, and his work is, still. So like all these artists really, what it taught me is not to think about success. Because I realized one thing wasn't really important about those particular artists, women artists who were making art at a certain time. They knew they weren't going to be famous. They knew that people were not going to buy their work, and they kept making art. And it's very different now, because people have more examples of success in their category of art making, so they compare themselves to other artists, but those artists were making art when no one was looking at them.
Did you ever think, I can't do this anymore? I can't.
No, because these artists were doing it, and no one knew who they were, and their work was amazing. I mean, there were just so much to look forward to working at this gallery. Just being there, I thought it was like a reality show, because I was meeting all these artists, and they were coming in and telling me these stories, and they would talk about these places they went to and all these musicians they knew, and and I felt like they were giving me like insider trading.
I like that. I like that.
Because I felt like I knew stuff that other artists didn't know, and I actually started talking to my friends who were in college for art about these artists, and some of my friends who also were African American didn't know about certain artists that I knew from having the experience of being exposed to these guys. And so I just figured that if I'm going to make art, I should just be happy with just making art.
You talk about African American artists. Were there white artists that affected you?
Of course.
Who?
One of the things that made me really think about my practice as an artist, as a multidisciplinary artist, is when I had to do a paper on like a Picasso painting, and I went to MoMA, and I saw this huge Bruce Nauman show, and it was like a retrospective in the mid-90s in MoMA, and I walked into MoMA and I saw like this crazy, like hectic, like kinetic thing moving around, and I said to myself, "You can do this, huh?" Like you can, because I've never been shown that when I was an undergrad, and I guess at the level I was, it wasn't part of the curriculum. But when I saw the Bruce Nauman show, I realized like that's the type of artist I want to do. That's the kind of art I want to make. I want to make works that can do a whole bunch of things, not just be on the wall. And I want to make things that are that can move, and things that can video, and his show was like a video and then a sculpture and then like a painting, and so from that time, I really started to investigate artists like Bruce Nauman, and became really interested in like Joseph Beuys, Bruce Nauman, Adrian Piper, even Jim Henson is a big influence on my work. There's plenty of artists from my culture as well as beyond who I think somehow I have conversations with the way I work and the way that I think. But you also realize that every artist has like a certain perspective that's valuable within this whole idea of art. Like I believe that we're all like on the holodeck of Star Trek. And we're all like appointed for certain reasons why we're there, and like there are there's certain stories that are just not told, or not being presented. And so I feel as an artist, there are certain things about my cultural perspective that is not normalized in art. And so I feel like, and for me, it's easy to do. It's easy to do, but the impact of it, I feel, is a challenge. And so I started to think about, even with those artists, like Bruce Nauman, they felt a void within the art world, and they filled the void with what they were doing. So for me, it's the same. I feel like it was a particular void that I wasn't experiencing going to see shows, and so I felt like I should step in and do those things.
Let me tell you a story. You may have know the story. They may know the story. I read this someplace. Picasso would go out to dinner. When the check came, let's say it was $25, he would pay for the meal with a check, and on that check, he would draw something. They would never cash that check. They take it home and frame it. So he got free meals. Are there artists from the days of yesteryear that you admire?
Yes.
Who?
From beyond the ones who are living?
Yes.
Picasso, of course. Picasso, there's so many. Elizabeth Catlett, who's passed, Romare, even going back even more, Cezanne. There's so many. It really has to do with like the period in which Matisse, has to do with the period in which they were making work. I think as you become more academic, you become more critical, and there's certain movements that you like more so than just the artist. And I think that's a good thing about being educated in art. You don't have to, I guess being an artist kind of gives you the authority to be critical of other artists and what they do. Because I think what you learn when you critique other artists is really more it really teaches you how much or what kind of artist you are when you're looking at someone else's art. So when you're speaking about someone's art, when you're looking at them, you're really speaking about yourself. Even within your critique of another person, you're thinking, I don't want to do that, more than I don't like that. It's really more like, this is what you're doing, I don't want to do that, or I want to do what you're doing. It's either one of those two. You're really projecting onto the other artist, and it could be healthy for both people or not, depending on how it's done. So I think for me, it's really about looking at what you could use from your experience with other artists or creative people and what you don't need to use.
Let's talk more about your work. You have an exhibit, as we speak, up in New York, about centered around the Negro Motorist Green Book, Sanctuary. Tell me, first of all, what is the Green Book?
The Green Book is like a an answer to like the before Yelp, or before any of those Seamless, or whatever you want to call it. Is Victor Hugo Green, who was a native New Yorker from Harlem. He was a postal worker. He decided to compile information and listings from other businesses around the country that welcomed black travelers, starting in the beginning of the segregation era, where people were traveling from north to south. And I thought, when I was invited to do the show, I began looking at archives of the Green Book just for inspiration, because the original publication had no images, but it had a lot of text. And I started Googling the addresses in the Green Book, seeing if some of the locations were still around, and became really intrigued by Mr. Green and him being this is a regular citizen. He was not a publisher. He filled a void. He filled a void that was existing within the African American community, and I also think that it was for the advancement of American culture by him doing this, because sometimes even within our culture we do things that affect our economy negatively just by thinking about race. He realized that there were black people who actually were in financial positions to buy things and to travel, because at that time in American society, travel was a big promotion, to travel with your family, to different sites and different things, and black people did not have the luxury of doing that because of danger. And so he, even in his description of the Green Book, I thought was very eloquent the way he put it, because he didn't even address the racial bias of why he made the Green Book. He said, I created this Green Book to avoid uncomfortable situations. Like, he was classy. He could have broke it down and said like a whole bunch of stuff. And he said this was designed to avoid uncomfortable situations. And so, and not only that he created this Green Book for that reason, but his intentions was for the Green Book not to exist forever, which most people who create publications never do it for that reason. Most persons do not put all their time and effort into creating a publication of compiling information for it to be a temporary project. He did it with the hopes that it was a necessity at the time, and it was easier for him to do it mainly because the Postal Workers Union was also segregated. And so when he would meet with the other postal workers, the black postal workers, they brought the information from the other businesses that they compiled all year to this party or whatever they had, and they were able to compile the data from that.
Remember I said I was going to tell you a story. My dad told me this story. The year was 1954. My parents had to drive from Sacramento all the way down to San Antonio. My mother was pregnant with me. So my dad, it was my dad, my mother, my sister, and my brother, and me inside my mother. My father ended up being a colonel in the Air Force. On that trip, he wore his uniform because people were less likely to bother you if you were in the military. They stopped someplace, and that Green Book, at the gas station, he asked the guy, do you know any place we can stay around here? He said no, but what I'll do is leave the door to the bathroom open so you can use that all night. They slept in the car all night. My dad, my sister, my brother, and my pregnant mother. And that was 1954. That's where this Green Book, in that era, helped people. How did this inspire you?
The Green Book or the stuff? Well, like most of my work, I really focus on another side of black culture that is a very familiar side to me, which is the side of leisure and the pursuit of leisure. And the Green Book really amplified that with my own personal interests, with other works I've made, because it really spoke, for me, it really spoke to the perseverance of black American culture and their ability to navigate through oppressive structures, and with very little means. And I've always been interested as an artist to talk about certain levels of normalcy that exists within my culture, regardless of what people outside see about the culture. And it came really at a particular time when I started the series that some people may know. It's images of black people on floaties, on pool floats. And I became really interested in like all the political implications of what people see for black people in water. And there's a lot of history, different things. The main reason is because black people weren't allowed to be in pools in the city. And some people, they wonder why black people don't swim. That's one of the reasons why we don't swim that much. We weren't allowed to swim.
Right.
That's why we don't know how to swim, number one. And there's so many other political things happening. People just put bleach in the water, lie in the water when we get into the pools. They get us out of the pools. There's documentation on it. There's images, video footage of people pouring bleach and lye in the pools when they start to desegregate the pools. So there's a lot of history with that. But one thing that really blew me away is, I'm interested in this kind of like this dual reality of like protest and leisure, because it's important for people even today who are active in community engagement to have leisure. And it's known and outside of our culture to have that. But when you think about like Malcolm X or Martin Luther King, you never really look at images or see images of them on vacation. And so I started researching those images and seeing images of Martin with his family in Jamaica in the pool swimming. And I started to think, while those images aren't as popular as the images of him being arrested or him protesting, it's a reason. Images circulate for various reasons, but I think that seeing black people at leisure is a political gesture, more so than the expected image of us pushing against stuff, which I think is important for people to see those images too. But I think that even within our culture, we reject those images of leisure because of oppressive structures based on us being oppressed. We were taught not to look like we're resting. I remember growing up, like when my grandfather came home, you had to pretend you were doing stuff. Yeah. You couldn't even like sit down. You had to like pick up a mop or a broom or
Have you been to
turn
my
on TV.
I have to do that for my wife.
Yeah, and that happens because it's like a thing, like you can't just have a break, and so, but I know that people take breaks, and I think that's another side of our culture that I want to present as a reality of a normal existence. And that's what my work is really about. And so my show at MAD is about the Green Book, but it's really more about Mr. Green.
Okay. You've had exhibits in London, in Paris. How are the audiences there different and the same as they are here?
Well, I think, I started to realize how American my work was because, what's so interesting about this country is that we have so many different groups here, which makes it more, I guess, not even more, but makes it the amazing place that it is in some aspects, because everyone, it's like a quilt. Like Mexican food here is as American as anything else.
Right.
Like Italian
Right.
food is like everything is just so, and when I started showing in Europe and different places like that, I started to realize those types of things within my work and how American it is. And, with some challenges, like in London, which you would think we're very close to here, the work was more challenging because Britain is really based on more an aristocracy structure. So everything is based on class and class structure.
Right.
So it's very different for them to see groups outside of the I guess the prominent group as being happy in their position of where they are and seeing it as a position of power. Okay. And because this is a new country, the playing field is much different, So there is really more about the have and the have-nots. I mean, that's basically the structure of that. So my work there was more challenging to see because my work was really not about being on the outside of anything. Like, I never saw myself as being on the outside of any particular group of people. I felt like I had a particular place in society, as everyone does, and I felt that my conversation was very valid to what I was thinking about. And so it was a funny story because I had to show at this gallery in London, and it was, it was a great opening and stuff like that. And I talked to them about the work and what I was thinking. And I guess they didn't really get the work. I mean, I was talking to my, like I'm talking now about, it was just not part of their, lost in translation. And the work didn't sell, whatever. And, but I didn't feel like it was going to sell because just the conversation we were having, understanding the work. And so eventually I stopped working. I mean, I didn't stop working with them, but I didn't show with them again. And so they brought the work to an art fair in Chicago, Expo. And I told them to bring a couple of pieces there. And one of the curators, Naomi Beckwith from MCA, Chicago, came. And she brought a tour group. She's an African-American curator. And she brought them to the booth, and she was explaining the work that was there. And the gallery owner called me, and he said, a group came by and saw your work. And he said, Derrick, I didn't know you were so deep. He was like, they really broke the work down. Like, I saw stuff that I didn't even notice. She explained to me with this group, whatever. And then I said to him, I can't show with you anymore. But I like you, but I can't show with you anymore because that's what I told him before. And so it's like those types of things where, you can decide to keep working with people or not working with people. But when you put your work in someone's hand as an artist, they are spokespeople for you. And they speak on your behalf if you're not around. And so you have to be, that's part of the success of being an artist, is picking the right spokesperson as you. And so, and that was a reality that I never thought about until that particular time. But that's the reality of being an artist, is like having the right person to speak. And they don't have to always be from your culture, your cultural background, but then understand your perspective within the work to explain it as if they were you, if you were not there.
Okay. Yeah. Lightning round. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. It's called Getting to Know Derrick. Name me 3 heroes: sports, movies, and TV.
Sports, what sports?
You're on. You pick whatever you want. Could be current or not current.
Let me think. I mean, I definitely think the new sports figures are more cooler for some reason.
Like?
Dwayne Wade.
Okay.
Paul Pierce.
LeBron. That's all basketball.
Yeah, so I mean, it's why when I look at something, it's usually what I look at when I'm looking at sports. I'm not even a sports person, but I like a lot of sports figures. I'm Colin Kaepernick. I mean, come on.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, come on. That's number one. Boom, boom, boom.
Movies.
Will Smith has always been my favorite guy. I'm more into the plight of people, seeing where they started and where they've gone to and what they've done with their power is important for me. What you do with your power is really a significant part of, to me, I think, as a creative person, because some people can keep all their stuff and just keep it within themselves, and some people share it. That makes it has more impact for me as a creative person.
How about TV?
TV. I know I love TV. My favorite person on TV, my number one favorite person is Regina King.
Okay.
I love her. Anything with Regina King on, I turn it on. I don't care what it is. I want to see Regina King in everything. I think she's amazing, and I think that she just, as a figure, she really captures a certain experience. Like she knows whatever character they pick her to communicate, she communicates it to the fullest, if not more. You know?
Favorite musical artists?
So many. Can I name a couple?
Yeah, I'll give you 3.
David Byrne.
Okay. David Byrne.
Yeah.
Who the funk, and you have to say funk. Who the funk that?
I know David Byrne, George Clinton, Nina Simone.
Okay. Favorite foods?
I have so many. I don't even have one. I just like good food.
Name some.
Sweet potato pie.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Favorite cities?
New York, definitely. New York. I love New York. I'm not, like, I grew up in Baltimore. Baltimore I have a love for. I'm just really into cities that really treat artists the way that New York treats artists.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, like it's place. If to be an artist in New York, it can be an unforgiving place to be an artist, but they appreciate artists. Artists there really support each other in a certain type of way that, and there's so many types of groups in New York of artists, and so I really enjoy being there through the hard times and the good times being there. But, you know, I'm also experiencing a lot of other cities I've visited, like being here today and being in Omaha and being in, I mean, I've traveled, LA has a nice, interesting, like, up-and-coming young art scene going on. I think it's becoming way more spread out within communities, and I think that cities are starting to support artists more on a more global level. But I will say, because my mom calls me all the time and says, when you coming home? I'm like, it's not my home. You in my hometown? Yeah, but she says this to me all the time, when you coming home? I'm like, that's not my home anymore. Yeah. But I think it's definitely growth, because I tell young artists all the time who go to school in New York or who want to come to New York, I said, listen, you don't have to come here anymore. Like, you don't have to be in New York. If you are coming here for a particular reason, then I understand coming here, but you can accomplish a lot of stuff not being in this particular city, because it is a certain type of atmosphere that everyone can't handle. It is not for everybody. It's not. It's a place that if you leave, no one says, like, where you go, what happened, where you go. They were like, oh, you left? I didn't even know. Like, because something's going on. It's like something's going on. You're like, I didn't even know you left. I thought you were just on vacation or something, or you just, like, you know.
For 5 years?
Yeah, like people just don't even know, you know.
Yeah.
But it's also a good thing if you want to slip away, you know. But it is one of those cities where sometimes when you want people to notice you, it might not be the way that you want. And that's what the gift I got from working at this nonprofit gallery and showing artists, working with older artists, from them telling me their stories. I just never had really high expectations of or grandeur of being an artist, other than just like, this is what you do. You make art. You're an artist. You make stuff. You just make it until you die. Like, you don't, you know, you just, you know, maybe you might give it to friends, and, you know, and I would learn different philosophies. Every person had their own philosophy of how to be an artist. And that was the best part of it. The best part is that everyone had something to say. And I was younger, and, you know, when you're younger, you get unsolicited advice all the time. Huh? So I got a lot of that. And some of it, most of it I was able to use, you know. I remember one of my biggest experiences, philosophy, I was at work one day. I worked at a small gallery. It wasn't a really big gallery, and I was there most of the time by myself. And artists would just wander around. And because they were mostly women and artists of color who we showed there, we couldn't always keep showing them, you know, if they weren't getting other shows. And we gave them good shows when we were there, but they would also cement our relationship, so they would just come visit when they were in town or in the neighborhood. And one artist who I respect, an older artist, she came in, she was really down, and I guess it was a particular time in her career, her life, whatever. And we were talking, and I could tell she was sad, and we were, and I got a lot of that at this gallery. A lot of artists would come in and vent and stuff, and I never experienced any of those things, like, 'cause I was in my 20s, so I'm like, I can't really relate to what you're saying, but it's useful. And she says to me when we leave, she leaves out the door, and she turns around and she says, "Art is a thankless profession." And I was like, oh, like I was, it was, but I didn't really understand what that meant then until as I became, more into what I was doing as an artist and thinking about what the role of an artist is. And I realized that you're not going to get thanked all the time, Like, it's the wrong profession if you want, like, any kind of, like acknowledgement, like, in a way that you think you're going to get. Like, it's better to be surprised that you get it than to expect it, Yeah. Don't ever expect it, because it won't be as rewarding as knowing that you deserve it,
Well, I think we are at the end. Derrick Adams, everyone.
Thank you, 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 thank you.
We're going to have a few minutes for Q&A. Does anyone have any questions for Derrick?
My question to you, I guess, if it might come more of a statement, but when did you actually figure out that you wanted to narrow down more on your cultural versus everything else that was being fed to you?
When I finished undergrad and before I went to graduate school, my friend went to Columbia, I was working at this gallery at Rush, and I realized that I was at a place where I had already was part of a community of artists, and I knew so much information about what was going on within my community and issues in my community. And so, but I really, because of all the information they were giving me, I didn't feel the same. I didn't feel like when someone tells me certain things from their experience and I see other artists making work based on those things, I realize that I don't have to make that kind of work because they have it covered. You have it covered. Like, if there's a lot of work being made talking about a particular thing, I'm not going to make work about that particular thing, because the whole point of being an artist to me is filling the void of a certain thing. So I started thinking about what did I had to offer based on my own personal experience with who I am and where I am within my culture and the culture at large. And so I just started thinking about, like, stuff I wanted to see. When I go to galleries, things I don't see in the galleries, and start looking at the work I saw in galleries that I went to that I didn't think was interesting. And from there, I realized, like, what type of work I wanted to make. But my work always was about, like, things I was interested in versus, like, when I see, like, I'm different. When some artists see works that things in society that trouble them and they make art about it, I'm the opposite. I see things in the society that trouble me, and I make work to counteract those things for the future generation to see and look at themselves in a certain way. I think those other artists are important too. I wouldn't be making what I'm making if they were making what they were making. So I encourage those artists to keep making those things because they do have an audience for that. But I know that my work, there's an audience for that as well. I don't think that my audience is, I remember a time when I was making what type of work I'm making now before that was not as well received within the audience because people weren't ready for it mentally to look at things and think a certain type of way. And I think now the generations are changing and people are becoming more interested in certain things, but you have to believe what you're saying is valid and interesting and keep believing in, and keep working at it, But I think if you look around and see what's being made and you look at a lot of art, then you can kind of create your voice through those things, because I think it's important to know what's been made before you or what's being made around you in order to make what you want to make.
Your story is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So we've heard about many things that brought you on this journey to this place that you are today, here in, of course, our amazing city, Orlando, Florida. We'll take
Go ahead,
it.
clap, go ahead, clap,
Come on,
clap,
we'll take
clap,
it.
clap.
Thank you, Downtown Arts District. So where do you see going from here? The future. The future. United States of America, overseas, Eastern, Western. Where do you see you taking this message, this creative talent, your amazing work to spread this word and encouragement and inspiration? Where do you see yourself going from here?
Well, as an artist, as a person who kind of works like mostly isolated in my studio, I would hope that what I produce will somehow influence not necessarily or only visual artists, but historians and literary people, non-visual, non-creative people to think about certain things. I think that being an artist is such a hard job by itself. I always say to people all the time, like, I've done enough. I've made the stuff, and I think that because visual culture is such a dominant culture, if the work I make is allowed to be seen in many places, then it can also be a vehicle to think about looking at various perspectives of American culture or just human culture or humanity in certain ways. And it's been really interesting because as an artist, and putting your work in different places, one day I get a text from one of my friends and she's in the hospital she took her fiance to a hospital in Chicago at some new hot clinic or whatever, and she texts me, she says, my boyfriend, I forgot his name, he had a fever, we took him to the hospital, and who did we see in the lobby but this painting? My painting was in the lobby of this hospital, which I have never gone to, but they have a collection. And I think that I've never seen any artwork I would like to look at in a hospital. I mean, I haven't never seen it. But I think things like that, like creating this very diverse perspective of culture and cultural perspective as a normal occurrence in the world, and not just make it into, I know art is special, but I think that it's also something that should be accessible to people who are not artists, and people should see art around them all the time because it has a definite positive response for people who encounter art. And so I think just being able to produce works that I feel passionate about and to talk about the things that I think are important would be somehow a hope to be a positive reflection on society in some ways. I mean, anywhere. I don't even know where it's going to be, That's one thing about being an artist. You don't know where your work is going to be. You have no idea. Once you leave your studio, it could be you never see it again. Yeah.
Okay, we have 2 more questions. They already raised their hands. I've got Marcia here in the back.
Thank you. Derrick, thank you so much for being here. This has been so inspiring. Speaking of inspiration, I'd like to know what inspires you to do the work that you do, and also, what would you say that we can do to inspire more young artists to do what they believe in and to follow their dreams?
What inspires me about being an artist is the fact that you don't really need much to create. You don't need a studio if you're an artist, even though a studio would be nice and is always nice because it gives you space to create. But if you didn't have a studio, you can make work anywhere. And so it's a way of really communicating your ideas that could be impactful to the viewer or whoever gets to see it. And it's a place, I feel, where producing work or producing imagery could, somehow have a very profound reaction to people, to make them do so many things that they wouldn't normally do without visual culture. Like we look at signs every day, directing us where we go. Artists made those signs. We go to the supermarket and we pick up things that artists made. If artists didn't make those labels on stuff that we were picking up, we wouldn't know what we're eating. We wouldn't know what we're eating if they didn't make those labels at the supermarket. Or, anything, everywhere we go, an artist made artist designed the space that we're in right now, the chairs we're sitting in, everything that we participate in, artists created it. Artists even create things for people. Artists even dumb down things, like interfaces of computers. As artists who they hire to do those things for certain people to make it easier for them to use certain things. So I don't think people really think about how impactful visual culture is just in general, like on our culture. And America, more than any other country, that's their power, visual culture. They have dominated society because of media, more than any other culture. Like other cultures won't even allow our media to infiltrate their culture because it's so powerful. People can't even look at the things that we look at over here because they know the influence that we have on their culture through our media system. So that's an important part to think about when you think about media culture and visual culture. There is a power to it, and the power to project images of people and what they do in culture has always been a very dominant part of even control and dominance. So I like to know those things as an artist and also know how to think about those things in my work and how to produce images that I think will empower the audience I want to talk to think about the future and think about themselves in the future. And I get messages from some collectors sometimes, and they tell me, they really like my work because what it makes them feel like when they come home from work and working in certain environments. When they come home, they want to see things that empower their kids and empower their family. And, those things are important. We really start thinking more intellectually about how imagery control the way that we think about society and people who are around us in society. You're welcome.
Hi, Derrick Adams.
Hey.
So you talked about influence and accessibility. And as you know, as your former intern,
Yes.
you had a tremendous
Great.
you had a tremendous influence upon me.
You were great.
I'm just a big crybaby. Anyway, at a time when I was studying in graduate school and I was the only African American in my class, and I came to your gallery and you brought me in and put me to work really hard.
I did.
But you reinforced accessibility with art to me. And I want you to understand that it does come full circle. You talk about Jacob Lawrence, how he influenced you. What you've done is tremendous, and I'm so proud of who you are and what you've done. Tell everyone what you shared with me about your upcoming experience with Brooklyn and teaching there and how you want to impact those students moving forward.
Oh, yeah. So I just took the job I just took, position. I was offered a position at Brooklyn College, and I've taught. Thank you. I've taught at quite a few colleges. I've taught at George Washington, at Columbia, and I'm at NYU right now as a visiting faculty member. And I really wanted to and at this particular time is actually not the best time for me to have a teaching position. Like, I'm very busy right now. I can't even, it's not a good time. But they called me to offer me the position. And they say, I think you'd be great for this position, you'd be great for the school. And I considered it, and I said I was going to take it. Then I said I couldn't take it, and then they called me. I was like, okay, I'll take it. But the reason why I wanted to take it, because I always had a dream, if I was to really teach, I would teach at a more of a community college than a like Ivy League college. And one thing that always stuck with me when I was at Ivy League colleges, at some of the professors who taught there, who were groundbreaking professors teaching at these schools, who were activists and different people speaking on certain things. And I was always wondering, why aren't they teaching at a city school? Not that you have to, but I was thinking, like, you'd be way more impactful teaching at a first generation college than you would be at an Ivy League school, where the kids are way less open and way less. At Ivy League schools, I found that, most kids, are just exposed to a lot of different things and exposed to having dinner with, like, some of these Ivy League professors all the time. And going into a city school, I felt like the kids were just so much more grateful to have someone who has a certain kind of pedigree, whatever, in the school, teaching them and spending time with them. And I just always imagined it being a more fulfilling experience than at a Ivy League school. Not that Ivy League schools are bad, but I just thought it would be more interesting for me and more engaging as a person who has so much to offer it to someone that I felt would be, I think, more worthy, I think. I just think that. This is my personal opinion.
Let's give Derrick Adams a round of applause.
Yeah.
And thank you, Marc. Marc McEwen, Derrick Adams, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.